I'd like to share some stories with you about a journey to finding beauty in deformity. My son and I were recently in a restaurant, and he got up to go get a straw. And when he came back to our table, he was crying, and he was extremely upset. And before I could even ask him what had happened, he said, "Mom, there's a girl over there, and her face is so deformed. It's not fair. She didn't ask to be born like that." And as he was talking to me, I looked past him and I could see the woman who was affecting him like this. And then he said, "Mom, I didn't know what to do." And I looked at him and I asked him, "How often do you think somebody smiles at her and says hello?" And his eyes brightened and he straightened up and he went to go back and get another straw so that he could smile at her and say hello. This 13-year-old boy made this beautiful choice. For as long as I can remember, I've questioned, where in human development do we start to distinguish what is beautiful and what is ugly? When I was a little girl, it used to bother me if somebody would kill an ant with no hesitation, just because it was ugly. And I remember thinking, hey, that ant didn't even know it was ugly. We'll let a ladybug crawl on us. We'll even save it if we think it's in danger. We would certainly never kill it. And I remember thinking, does the ladybug know that it's cute? Does it walk around thinking, I'm safe? My artwork would become an exploration into where we find beauty, the dangers in it, and our judgment of it. In the time that I've been standing here, you've likely judged me. You may have already labeled me. But just by looking at me, you wouldn't know that I inspire violence. For example, when I was in college, a student locked me in his room against my will, sexually molested me, and brutally beat me for 3 hours. By looking at me, you wouldn't know that I inspire fear and cruelty, when my clothes don't conceal that I'm a burn survivor. When I was 11 months old, I pulled a coffee pot down on myself, and 95% of my body was burned. In 1966, when this happened, what the medical community understood about burns, my mortality rate was 90%, and my parents were told to say goodbye to me. But I happened to have a surgeon from Schenectady, New York, who was studying burn victims out of the Vietnam War. And he had to convince my parents to do a procedure that didn't become popular until the 70s. He had to do skin grafts. He needed to scar me more, and that man saved my life. I was in critical condition for a year. I had surgeries every year of my life until I was 14. I remember not being able to touch my shoulder. The skin just didn't go that far. So I would heal from one surgery just in time for the next one. I'm instantly scanned for the evidence of this description of myself. I've lived my entire life in judgment between beauty and deformity. By just looking at me, I don't have to say a word, and I could be stuck up or conceited. But if I was changing in gym or at the beach, I was a freak and a leper. It's hard to say. So, I endured a lifetime of cruelty. I live in chronic pain from my burns. But nothing was more painful than being made to feel like I didn't belong just because of the way I look. So I endured comments like, "I'd kill myself if I looked like you. You need to cover that shit up, it's rude to make me look at it. Sorry, I don't date girls who've been through the meat grinder." Those are very difficult to say. I'm sure they might be hard to hear. And they were very affecting. But they didn't stop me from changing in gym or going to the beach in my bathing suit. But they did teach me to hide my vulnerability. I became an expert at it, and I hid in my art. In post-operative, I was heavily bandaged. I wasn't allowed to move too much, so I was given things to do with my hands. And my talent was noticed at a very early age. And the matriarchs in my family would push this, encourage it. And eventually they started whispering in my ear, "Fotini, your work is going to be very important someday. It's going to be in museums." And I thought, what? That's where they put really old stuff. That's where they put precious things, work that has something important to say. I don't have anything important to say. I didn't believe them. However, I did believe them that I shouldn't waste my talent, so I went to Pratt Institute and I studied illustration. And I became a freelance illustrator. And this work was extremely unrewarding. I needed to give back. So I signed up to volunteer at the Children's Hospital, where I had 92 pages of personal history. And I didn't think I would make it past the first day. The smells and the sounds in the hospital were just way too familiar. Dina was my child life specialist on my first day. And she saw my fear, she knew my history, and she gave me a book. And she said, "Go down the hall to room number 3. There's a little girl in there who can't get out of bed. Her name is Shantia. And go read this book to her." So I went into Shantia's room. She was 6 years old at the time, and I sat down on her bed, and I started to read to her her favorite story, the monster at the end of this book. Grover doesn't want you to turn any pages in this book, so as you turn the pages, Grover becomes more and more animated. And as Grover becomes more animated, I became more animated. And as I became more animated, Shantia started to pull back, and she made a yucky face. And I stopped, and I said, "Sweetheart, am I scaring you?" She said, "No, you just have really bad breath." Yeah, yeah, great. I'm here to help. Yeah, so I was hooked. I was initiated. I spent the next 7 years volunteering with pediatric oncology with pockets full of Tic Tacs. Within the first year of volunteering at Children's Hospital, I started painting murals on the walls. I was painting these giant, unspoiled landscapes. And the children would watch me paint. They influenced my work. Shantia was my best critic. And they would try to find the alphabet that I would hide in the paintings. And for just a moment, they would forget where they were. For many of them, it was the last place they ever saw. My work was meaning something. I was making a difference. There was something else happening with these murals. For lack of a better term, I was falling in love with these blobs. These were my underpaintings. They were going to get covered up with more paint. So I started photographing them before that happened. And I just tucked them into a sketchbook somewhere, and I forgot about them. I would discover them 9 years later. I took a leave of absence. I got pregnant and had my son, my greatest work. In 2010, I was going through a very difficult time in my life. I was depressed and seeking solace, and I started going into a coffee shop, just going through art magazines. And I became extremely inspired with the work that was getting done in the world. I hadn't created a piece of art in 8 years. Found an old sketchbook, and I started doodling in it with no direction, and I came across this photo. And I didn't even remember how it got there. I didn't know what it was of. And the only way I can describe it to you is I saw this image. I couldn't identify what it was, but I saw beauty in it. I saw beauty and deformity at the same time. They weren't separate. They were together. And I had no way of knowing it at the time, but I was about to discover a language. I was going to abandon representational form. I was going to move into the abstract. I was going to break rules. I'm the firstborn. I'm not supposed to break rules. I was about to destroy them without violence, without hate, without sadness, but basically with just real pure bravery. And I needed to be brave, because now I was inspiring comments like, Fotini, you're just like your work. No one will ever understand you. I took graphite pencil and I started obliterating form with a sense of entitlement, with a sense of purpose, with a sense of responsibility. I was drawing me. I wasn't drawing burns or scars or anything bodily. In fact, quite the opposite. I was drawing the most unrecognizable form I could possibly do. If something started to look too much like something, I would obliterate, I would destroy it. And I wasn't doing this in private. I wasn't doing this in secluded studios. I was doing this in coffee shops. At first, out of necessity, I didn't have anywhere else to go. So I'm sitting in a coffee shop doing these drawings. I wasn't working on a computer or reading a book. So there was this natural curiosity for strangers to walk up and look at what I was doing. And I wasn't drawing anything recognizable like an apple, so the most common question I would have is, what is that? And I had an answer. And I told them my story. And something amazing started to happen. People started telling me their stories of triumph, their stories of perseverance and strength or struggle, their stories of humanity. And 6 years ago, I thought these stories were extremely important. I started writing them down. And they needed a place. So I started writing them on coffee cups. It seemed obvious. I was surrounded in these coffee shops. These stories were important. They were so personal. My brother has MS, this one man told me, and he's taught me to be a better man. Recently, a young lady told me that her sister was diagnosed with Down syndrome in utero, and her parents were told she could selectively terminate, but they decided to have her sister, and she's the reason why she loves the way she loves. Her story was important. It's on a cup. Another woman told me that her best friend growing up was a burn victim, and her friend was the reason why she became a doctor. That's powerful. She's on a cup. I also get what I like to call as drive-by comments. It's amazing what people say to me. I had a man walk up, he looked over my shoulder and he goes, "It looks like somebody ran over my dog. Are you going to put tire tracks across that?" Another man walked up and he said, "That's interesting, what are you going to do with it?" I said, "Oh, this is going to go to the Burchfield." He goes, "Oh, I love to play golf there." He's on a cup. One of the best comments I ever got, and I'm still trying to figure it out, is, "Your genius will never be accepted as currency at Wegmans." I think he told me I'm going to be a starving artist. I'm not quite sure. My work has become a dialogue for our stories that are not on our outsides. I don't claim to know at what point we start to distinguish what's beautiful and what's ugly. I do know we have a choice to judge or to smile at someone and say hello. But the most important lesson I've learned in my journey is that when we are without judgment, we not only can see beauty, but we become it. Thank you.